Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and pull back the curtain on a deeply unsettling reality. Have you ever felt like you're doing absolutely everything right in life? You know, getting good grades, securing that prestigious degree, landing the coveted corporate job, but somehow you still end up feeling completely financially trapped and totally burned out? Well, you are definitely not alone, and spoiler alert, it's not an accident. Today, we're going to explore the hidden psychology and the structural architecture behind our modern education system. We are going to expose how compulsory mass education was never actually engineered to foster your creative independence or help you build wealth. Instead, it was designed as a highly effective matrix to produce obedient, reliable employees.
Let's just acknowledge the collective exhaustion we all feel for a second and pose the central mystery of our modern age. Why does an educational system that constantly promises empowerment actually just normalize the rat race? Think about it. Why do incredibly smart individuals, doctors, accountants, engineers, who earned exceptional grades, so often struggle financially their entire lives? We're all led to believe that the traditional path is the ultimate avenue to security and personal fulfillment. But when you look at a systemic analysis of historical labor demands and cognitive outcomes, it reveals a starkly different reality. We are literally running on a treadmill that was explicitly built to keep us moving, without ever actually getting ahead.
We're going to begin this psychological awakening with a really profound realization from financial educator Robert Kiyosaki. His quote perfectly highlights the deliberate structural omission of financial education in our upbringing. He notes that people learn to work for money, but never learn to have money work for them. Financial illiteracy is the very foundation of financial struggle. The traditional system focuses heavily on scholastic and professional skills, basically teaching you exactly how to be a highly effective worker for an employer, but it remains absolutely, completely silent on the mechanics of money itself. The result? A population expertly trained to trade their time for a paycheck, but completely blind to the systems of leverage and compounding interest that actually build real wealth.
To understand why, a quick look at history reveals the true ancestry of the modern classroom. Traditional schooling wasn't born from some grand, noble desire to enlighten humanity. It was a state response to industrial and military needs. Back in 1806, following the humiliating military defeat, Prussia created the first centralized, tax-funded school system. The explicit goal was to create obedient soldiers, disciplined factory workers, and loyal civil servants who would never, ever question state authority. By 1843, American reformers like Horace Mann imported this exact model to enforce a uniform set of industrial values on a growing population. And then, by 1907, the Gary Plan introduced school bells. Why? To segment the day and prepare children to clock in and out of industrial shifts. Our schools are, quite literally, modeled after 19th century factories.
This philosophy is chillingly summarized by Frederick Taylor Gates. He was a trusted advisor to John D. Rockefeller and a key figure in the corporate philanthropies that heavily financed this new educational system. In 1913, he openly admitted that the goal was not to create independent thinkers, philosophers, or statesmen. They already had an ample supply of the elite for that. The dream was to work their will upon what he called a docile folk, conditioning the masses to perfectly execute standardized tasks. It was the deliberate, calculated creation of a dual-track system, comprehensive education for the elite and behavioral compliance training for the rest of us. Consequently, the classroom was literally transformed into an assembly line. Driven by Frederick Winslow Taylor's theories of scientific management, educational administrators enthusiastically applied industrial efficiency to human beings. They broke complex crafts down into discrete, repeatable tasks, totally eliminating the need for independent artisans. Children were actually viewed by early educational deans as raw products to be fashioned for the corporate workforce. They were separated by age, subjected to top-down curriculums, and trained in absolute obedience. The entire system ensures that the internal structures of schooling directly mirror the social relationships of the corporate workplace.
The contrast between the organic learning of the past and the mass-produced sorting of the present is honestly pretty stark. Before the 19th century, learning was highly personalized. It relied on master-apprentice relationships. An assessment was a developmental tool, often an oral exam to prove actual real-world mastery of a skill. But the industrial age required a scalable way to evaluate and compare massive populations. So the system introduced standardized numerical scales and eventually multiple-choice tests. Unsettlingly, this multiple-choice format was actually borrowed from military intelligence testing used to rapidly sort recruits during World War I. This wasn't designed to enhance your learning. It was a coldly efficient mechanism to streamline your transcript for future corporate employers.
This system also systematically weaponizes fear.
In the real world, human beings are naturally designed to learn through trial and error. We learn to walk by falling down, right? As Thomas Edison pointed out, inventing the light bulb required successfully finding over 1,000 ways that did not work. But school teaches us that making a mistake is the worst possible outcome. By demanding conformity to a single right answer and socially shaming children for their errors through public grading, the system induces a severe analysis paralysis. It trains us to be absolutely terrified of losing, fundamentally handicapping our ability to take the intelligent risks required for financial freedom.
And the results of this conditioning? They are staggering. A study by Dr. George Land, which was originally developed to identify innovative engineers for NASA, tested the creative capacity of children over time. At ages 3 to 5, an astounding 98% of children scored at the creative genius level. 98%! But after just 5 years of traditional schooling, that number plummets to 30%. By age 15, it's 12%. And by adulthood, after total subjection to the employee mindset and corporate hierarchies, only 2% retain that creative genius. Think about that. Traditional schooling literally educates the natural curiosity and divergent thinking right out of us, replacing it with intellectual passivity.
So ask yourself this deeply paradoxical question. Why are taking risks and failing, the very drivers of entrepreneurial success, scientific discovery, and human progress, socially shamed in the modern classroom? The A students are often just the ones who made the fewest mistakes and followed the rules the most closely. But out in the real world, outside the artificial bubble of academia, the people who actually take action and make the most mistakes are the ones who ultimately win the game of life. The fear of being different, the fear of criticism, it forces most people to just play it safe, locking them into a life of mediocrity.
Just 18 hours. That is the shockingly low average amount of time spent on personal finance instruction over 4 entire years of high school. While school districts pour massive resources into standardized STEM subjects to create highly skilled technical workers, they maintain absolute silence on practical, life-saving financial concepts, things like compounding interest, basic tax law, and the difference between an asset and a liability. This is not an accidental oversight, guys. It is a structural necessity. If the masses were taught how to escape the rat race, the supply of cheap, docile, dependent labor for large corporations would instantly collapse.
And without that financial literacy, the middle class walks right into a trap. They are conditioned to acquire liabilities that they falsely believe are assets. We're talking oversized houses, luxury cars, consumer debt. Their hard-earned income goes straight to expenses and feeding those liabilities. Their balance sheets are completely unbalanced, loaded with debt, and totally void of real assets that generate passive income. Because their only source of cash flow is their paycheck, their livelihood becomes entirely dependent on their employer. They're kept running on the treadmill, taxed to the absolute max, and utterly paralyzed.
This dependency is then cemented by what we can call parasitic debt. We are heavily programmed to believe that the only way to elevate our intrinsic value and command a higher hourly rate is to return to the system for advanced degrees, an MBA, a doctorate, a professional certification. But this formal education is ungodly expensive. It traps millions of graduates in massive non-cash flowing student loan debt before their careers even begin. This debt is the ultimate Trojan horse to your freedom. It forces you into lifelong job servitude simply to pay off the interest, binding you to the corporate hierarchy just to survive.
All of this programming ultimately paralyzes us emotionally. While traditional education strictly focuses on the mind, it crushes the spirit with the emotion of fear. Fear of not getting a job, fear of failing, fear of standing out. This absolute lack of emotional education makes us cling tightly to the psychological illusion of job security. We become terrified of the unknown. We stay in safe, salaried positions because our inner spirit has been conditioned since kindergarten to constantly seek the approval of an authority figure, whether that's a teacher handing out grades or a boss handing out a paycheck.
So what's the ultimate result of this multi-decade conditioning process? A highly educated but financially fragile individual. They possess specialized academic credentials but rely entirely on external corporate structures for survival. They are trapped in a transactional model where they must trade active time for money, severely limiting their leverage. They're programmed for repetition, obedience, and endless exhaustion. They are brilliant at minding someone else's business and making that person rich, but they have completely forgotten to mind their own. But here is the critical awakening, the light at the end of the tunnel. The industrial age, which relied on this synchronized, compliant workforce, is over. The blueprint has changed. We must rapidly transition our minds from being specialized, obedient employees of the past to becoming sovereign individuals of the information age. The old model was all about linear scaling and intrinsic value tied strictly to your hours. The new model? It's about exponential scaling, building self-directed systems, embracing trial and error, and leveraging specific knowledge that machines and standardized workers simply cannot replicate.
As the entrepreneur Naval Ravikant points out, the internet has massively broadened the possible space of careers, unlocking infinite leverage.
To truly escape the rat race, we have to engage in a systematic process of cognitive unlearning. You must consciously deprogram the behavioral obedience instilled by decades of schooling. You have to step off the standardized track, stop seeking permission, and stop trading your finite active time for wages. The goal is no longer to be the best cog in a machine, but to become an architect. You must set up systems, acquire foundational financial literacy, and build environments that leverage your unique skills in cyberspace, finally breaking the linear trap of the employee mindset.
Ultimately, the matrix of the educational system is functioning exactly as it was designed to program you for lifelong career servitude. But you now possess the awareness to see the walls of that factory. The question is, will you continue to finance and support your own behavioral obedience, or will you finally choose to step out of line, reclaim that 98% creative genius you were born with, embrace the risk of failure, and cultivate your own path to absolute intellectual and financial freedom? The choice is entirely yours.